We'll lend you a clean, we know our lenses are clean.
Obviously our speaker. Linda, Austrian, welcome. Are you a NIMAC member? You could put it in the chat, Linda. And Craig, welcome. And I see Ballard, I see Rose. Peter, welcome, Peter. And Jim. Andrea, I'm not sure where Andrea is. Brown, Frank, Ellen. So welcome and welcome, welcome members, welcome guests. If you can hold on a second, I have to grab my cell phone. Oh, here it is. It was behind the computer. Okay, I don't know that we have any business that we have to go over. Just you all got the email about the picnic, which is going to be, I believe it's July 9th. It's the first Saturday after the 4th of July weekend. Our next competition is Bridges. That's in 2 weeks, right, Matt? Okay. And so that means upload not by this Sunday, but the following Sunday. Joe's coming in with a chair. Now, do you have anything for the internet, Joe, that we need to go over?
No.
Okay. Terry already told me we don't have anything for NJFCC. And Melinda, probably not. Yes, no? Shake your head or nod. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're good on business. Not much going on. We have for July and August. So I will introduce our speaker and thank Valerie, as always, for getting us such a wonderful person. We're going to hear from Betty Wilson tonight. Betty began learning photography after retiring from a career as a newspaper publisher. Her husband, Jim, gave her his hand-me-down camera and a lot of encouragement, and she's never looked back. Her passion for photography includes a wide variety of types, including macro, landscapes, and nature photography. And in addition to being honored as Photographer of the Year at the Chester County Camera Club in Pennsylvania, she's received numerous recognitions for her artistic photography, including a silver medal awarded at the Wilmington International Exhibition of Photography and first place award in photography at the Philadelphia Flower Show. Betsy's an active member of the Chester County Camera Club, and she's given numerous presentations and led workshops for area camera clubs. So Betsy, we welcome you. Thank you for coming. And we'll get you unmuted. And I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to go sit down. Oh, Betsy, can you unmute her, please, Matt? Okay. Betsy, Matt's going to unmute you, but question for you. Do you want questions throughout your presentation, or do you want them saved for the end?
I'll take a break about halfway through, and that would be a great time for questions. But if you see anything that needs attention right away, like someone has a question about this slide right now, or if the audio or video starts going wonky, let me know.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay now and see me okay?
We can hear and see you fine. And Valerie, for everyone on the line, if you do have anything going wrong, Valerie is here to help, and she also will gather questions. So you can certainly, as you think of your questions, put them in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm
Great,
gonna
thanks.
go on mute, and I'm turning it over to you, Betsy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let me share screen. And can everybody see that? Slideshow. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's get started. I want to thank you for inviting me, and I am really happy to have this opportunity. My husband, Jim, who is on this call, that's the other Betsy Wilson. We're both members of the local camera club near us, which is the Chester County Camera Club in Pennsylvania. And I'll tell you, we have learned so much from Camera Club and made a lot of good friends too. So I think you're in the right place. So motion photography, got a lot to cover tonight. There are so many different interpretations. We can freeze a moment in time, capture a special moment. We can use techniques to actually manipulate motion or to see things in a different way. And we can actually use motion to create a mood or feeling. So I'm going to cover a lot tonight. Some I'm going to talk about are freezing action, long exposure, panning and zooming, rear curtain sync. Of course, you have to talk about photographing water when you're talking about motion. I'm going to touch on neutral density filters, and then we'll get into some really fun stuff like light painting of motion and a fun toy called a pixel stick. And I will wrap up with some tricks and some Photoshop ideas that can simulate motion. And I will include the shutter speed and aperture on most of the images, but I can also share a PDF of the highlights of the presentation. So don't feel like you need to take any notes. Most of the images I'll show you are mine, but I have included some by my husband, Jim. He's the guilty party who got me into photography about 10 years ago, and he's definitely my technical backup. I tend to focus a little bit more on the artistic side, and I can be a little bit technically challenged. And I find that it is always a challenge to do a presentation to a camera club because it's such a diverse audience. I'm sure you have members who are just starting out and want to learn the basics. And I looked at your website. I know you have some very talented photographers who are very experienced. So I'll start out with the basics and then gradually kind of layer it up from there. But no matter how much you know, I find anyway, there's always something new to learn and some new technique to try out. That's what makes this fun. While putting this together, I learned a few things I'll share with you. Most of this is based on in-camera techniques, but again, I'll wrap up with some Photoshop post-processing ideas. And my research started with a little bit of history. So you're probably familiar with this very famous photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson. This is often used to illustrate what is known as the decisive moment, which is when the visual and psychological elements in a scene briefly come together. So, I mean, not only did he capture the motion of the feet suspended in the air and reflected in the water, but look how the reflection actually mirrors what's going on in the circus poster in the background. Pretty cool. And I love this image of a cyclist. So it's believed that he found his composition and just waited for the cyclist to move into that exact desired position, another decisive moment. So these are both examples of freezing a moment in time. But let's move on to an image that actually shows motion, and we're going to settle a little bet along the way. So there was this businessman named Leland Stanford, and he owned racehorses. And he had this bet with his buddies because he said when his horse was racing, all four legs came off the ground simultaneously. Well, back then, no one had ever seen it, so no one believed it. So he paid photographer Edward Muybridge to prove his point. And Muybridge set up a series of 12 cameras along the track. And they were triggered by wires. So when his horse ran around, he would set off the cameras. And he wound up with 12 separate exposures. And as you can see here, in the third exposure, he won his bet. Indeed, all 4 feet were off the ground at the same time. So let's move to a single image that shows motion. This is Philadelphia artist Thomas Eakins. He was also a photographer. And ironically, he worked alongside Muybridge for a while at the University of Pennsylvania. Well, Eakins developed his own method because he had the goal of actually studying anatomy to further his paintings. So whereas Muybridge relied on a system of cameras triggered to produce multiple photos, Eakins used a single camera to produce a series of exposures superimposed on one negative. And I want to mention one more from history. This was taken by a 25-year-old Ansel Adams when he created this image of the monolith of Half Dome. And he first used a yellow filter to darken the sky a bit, but his experience of what he saw was more dramatic than he knew he could get with that yellow filter. Well, keep in mind, he had to hike up a mountain with heavy gear. He had only one glass plate left, and he tried a new red filter, hoping it would darken the sky to create the image that he imagined or visualized. So this experiment actually proved to be a turning point for him because for the first time, he was conscious of the difference between what his camera lens saw and what he saw in his mind's eye as the final print. The first time he actually used visualization. And I'll swing back to this again later. So we'll be talking a lot about either freezing time or capturing a period of time, either using a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed. So most camera modes, cameras have a mode dial shutter priority with an S on it, or some cameras, it has a TV for time value. But either one of these means that you tell your camera how long you want your exposure to be. And in most cases, you can let the camera decide the rest. So let's start with the most basic techniques of motion photography. Exposures can freeze actions that happen faster than the blink of an eye. So this was shot at 1/2000th of a second. And again, people always ask about settings, so I will include the aperture and ISO on most images, but keep in mind for motion photography in general, the most important factor is shutter speed. A skateboarder in Central Park, frozen in midair at 1/500th of a second. This is my husband, Jim. He's tossing cherry blossoms in the air. They're all frozen. More skateboard antics, this one taken by Jim. See, I do give him credit. I like to imagine what thoughts must be going through the minds of this couple in the water with their feet in the air. So fast shutter speeds are almost always used to capture sports events to freeze the action. But in addition to sports, there are other fleeting moments that the only way to capture is with a fast shutter speed. So I don't know if any of you have attempted to photograph frozen soap bubbles. I tried a lot of times before getting it because if it isn't cold enough or if there's any wind at all, your bubbles will pop before you have a chance to push the shutter. And be prepared to freeze your fingers off to get this shot. And you have to be really fast because they usually don't last long. And I was actually happy to get this one at the moment of exploding. But these crystals form right in front of your eyes. And if you can capture these elusive bubbles, you can actually get some beautiful crystal formations like these. When photographing wildlife, this is a grizzly bear in British Columbia. I wanted to be sure to freeze any moment, any movement at all to get a sharp image. So at 1/500th of a second, you could freeze action. But for faster action like birds in flight, you'd probably want to go with 1/1000th or maybe 1/2000th of a second. And again, these images are all taken with the camera set to shutter priority. And I want to point out the magic of a fast shutter speed. I'm not a bird photographer, but I did have a goal of capturing a hummingbird, so at least I got these shots. So I included this to make a point about motion. Think about the speed of a hummingbird's wings. They flap, they actually make a figure eight movement 50 times per second, much, much faster than you can see with your eyes. So, think about that bet on the feet of the racehorse. They had never actually seen all 4 feet in the air. Well, without high-speed photography, we would never see the wing of a hummingbird in flight. And a great place to practice capturing motion isn't too far from where I live. It's Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area in Pennsylvania, out in Lancaster County. I hope some of you have been there, because in late February and early March, tens of thousands of beautiful snow geese stop here. And it's actually an amazing sight and sound when they all lift up in unison. And close to sunset, they fly in from the fields to roost on the lake for the night. And this is a good example of what your camera can see, but your eye cannot. So like a ceiling fan spinning around and you can't see the individual fan blades, these snow geese, they fly and they circle. And when you are there, you experience this amazing motion, but your eye cannot freeze and see the scene like your camera can. These are tundra swans at Middle Creek, and they can be quite graceful when flying overhead. And another fast shutter speed to freeze the action of a street performer. Jim and I were fortunate to go on a photography trip to Cuba, where we visited a local dance studio. And it was quite dim in the room. This bright light was just pouring in from the back window. So you can see here, not great lighting conditions. So in this case, I set my camera, at the time it was a Sony a6000, to an automatic preset called Sport Mode, which basically means I wanted the camera to pick all the settings that I needed to freeze the action. So it has a very high ISO of 3200, which can create some noise or sort of a grainy look. But for me, I would prefer to have some noise in the image and be able to capture unique dance actions rather than have a perfect quality shot and miss the whole point. We also attended a performance by a Santeria dance troupe. And Santeria is an Afro-Cuban religion, and the dancers perform this frenzied, sort of a trance-like dance to drums. It's really quite fascinating. At 1/200th of a second, it was fast enough to freeze most of the action, but you start to see a little bit of blur on the dress and the hair. So these examples were all done with natural light, but the burst of a flash is much faster than the shutter speed of your camera. So to really capture high-speed movement, it is best to use a flash. So here, although the shutter speed is 1/250th of a second, the motion is frozen by the flash, which is actually faster, as fast as maybe 1/10,000th of a second. So this was done at home just by dropping colorful objects into a fish tank. And you do need to pre-focus where you think your subject will be, as it happens way too fast for any kind of autofocus to work. So, and here's the setup. And again, I will share a PDF of slides that include notes such as this. You need a fish tank. You need a dark background behind the fish tank. Here I have a black blanket up behind the fish tank. After this shot, Jim and I painted the backside of it black. And there's a squeegee in the front there. That's to remove bubbles that form on the inside of the glass. And you pre-focus on an object. So that's why this hammer is here with this blue tape. This is where I think the strawberries will be when I drop them in the tank. So pre-focus on that, and then obviously gently take the hammer out and fill your tank up with water. Use an off-camera flash, and get a friend to drop some fruit or other objects into the tank, and find a friend that doesn't mind getting wet. It can get messy. So here are some other items that I played with. Look around your house, see what you can experiment with, or get into the action yourself. And don't be afraid to get wet. And again, at 1/60th of a second, you would not freeze those bubbles unless you used a flash. And if you don't have a fish tank or an external flash, you can still create images similar. So I picked up a flat-sided clear plexiglass vase at the dollar store, and that worked quite well. And I just set up a strong desk light for some side lighting, and, fill your container with some seltzer water, and voila. Capturing the motion of smoke is fun. Burn some incense and use that flash. So images can be recorded in a fraction of a second, or over much longer periods of time. So a fraction of a second, the movement is frozen. Now it is slowed down to 1/15 of a second, introducing some blur, allowing the camera to capture the movement of the birds. And I find even with wildlife, longer shutter speeds, it just can lead to sort of surprising new images. So I like to experiment with different shutter speeds just to see what kind of creative things I can come up with. So fast shutter speed, slower shutter speed, and neither one is right or wrong, just depends on what you want to convey. I love this capture by Jim. This is one of those snow geese at Middle Creek. And here's one of mine. I think it's quite surreal, a little bit haunting, I think. Or slow that shutter down a bit to capture the motion of snow flying in an open window. If I had shot this at 1/500th of a second or faster, the snow would have been captured as tiny specks instead of these streaks, which gives more of a feel of motion. And time exposures can allow us to record things that we can't see with the naked eye. So the streaks of light are actually the headlights on the left and the taillights on the right. Your camera sees them stretched out, your eye does not. And I love trying to capture a mix of static objects and moving objects, the people standing motionless while the train speeds by. And with a long shutter speed, people in motion can take on ghost-like qualities. This one's quite abstract, but you can still tell this is a SEPTA train speeding by. Now this is a highway. The cars they're probably doing at least 60 miles per hour. So this is a 2-second exposure to capture these streaks of light. But now I'm in a small downtown and the cars were moving much slower. So this was a full 8 seconds. My camera was on a tripod, a must when doing an 8-second exposure. And here's the same downtown from the roof of the public parking lot. So this was a challenge. The roof has this high cement wall around it. So I actually had to raise my tripod in the air and brace the tripod legs against the wall to get the camera over the wall to get this shot. I actually had to guess at the direction of the camera. I kind of got lucky with this shot. So let's capture some wildlife in motion. This is a school of menhaden fish in Cape Cod, and they were moving fast. I love the spiral pattern that they made. And this is a selfie of my shadow, just to give you a sort of an idea of the sense of scale and how many there were. A muskrat at a wildlife preserve in Delaware, and not where you would expect to capture wildlife. This is at Grounds for Sculpture. I'm sure many of you have been there. And here, I was happy to get this reflection. And an unlucky fish. I don't know what kind of bird this is. I think some kind of a stork. This was from a wonderful trip we took a few years ago to Botswana. And a few more from that trip. This one just makes me laugh. And these elephants would dust themselves. First, they splash themselves with water, and then they create their own dust storm. So the dust cools them off, and apparently it protects their skin from parasites. Capture of the elephant just tossing the water up. And a hippo thrashing about while sparring with another hippo. This was pretty intense. This one much calmer, a baby baboon cradled by its mother. So let's move on to setting up the scene and waiting for something to happen. Like Henri Cartier-Bresson's famous image. So it's believed that he would scout out his composition and then wait to capture that precisely timed, meaningful moment. What we see here is probably the result of the so-called fishing technique. You find a good location and then wait for a suitable subject to enter the frame and complete your composition. So here are a series of images by my husband, Jim. This is at the reenactment of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of the Brandywine. And he was attracted to the repeating patterns of these soldiers' tents. And by moving around, he framed a nice composition. I like the leading lines going through the 2 rows of tents. And every so often, some of the soldiers would walk through the frame. So he just stayed there for a while, hoping to capture someone of interest at just the right moment. And there it is. When this young soldier walked through with the drum on his back, he felt he had something special. And I agree. I had the same idea in Cuba. As I was fascinated by the colors and the shapes of the painted wall, the peeling paint on the door. So I just sat on the curb across the street and watched people go by. And this guy in the pink cap, he wasn't going anywhere. But then I noticed that the low sun was actually making these really cool shadows on the wall. And I thought, if maybe I can get the man perhaps showing an interaction with a shadow. And then it happened. So in this shot, I think it's graphically pleasing. I love the story and the expression on this man's face. And another example by Jim, this is Grand Central Station in New York. Bright sunlight was pouring in at a low angle, creating long shadows. So he just positioned himself in the middle of the commotion and waited. And he started out by framing the people, but then he tilted the camera down. He started to focus less on the people and more on the shadows, and just waiting for something interesting. And here it is. This was the decisive moment. The foot on the right and the foot on the left are both lifted off the floor, showing the movement. And the shadow of the little girl holding her father's hand, that captured the moment he was waiting for. So up until now, we've held the camera steady and either frozen motion or allowed motion to move and be captured. Well, let's shake that up a bit. Now we move the camera. Intentional camera movement, or ICM as it's sometimes referred to, it's a different branch of photography altogether. And the final result produces a blurred, colorful, abstract image on purpose. So, think of it maybe as like being an expressionist painter. And panning is one of the most popular ICM techniques. It's easy and it's fun. So using a slower shutter speed, maybe 1/30th or 1/15th of a second, you swipe your camera up or down. You're panning your subject. Sometimes they're actually called swipes. And I think part of the fun of panning is that you never really know how your image will turn out. And this is another example of how our eyes and the camera see things differently. If you look at a tree with your eyes and you move your head up and down, you will likely still see the tree well defined, but the camera doesn't. It sees a blur. And you can do this with a tripod, but I usually do it handheld, and I'll brace, I kind of tuck my elbows into my sides so that I can pivot up and down, and that avoids kind of the camera shaking. It just helps you to keep it steady. And I think trees work very well, as although you get a dreamy, surreal image, you can still recognize the subject. It does take a lot of experimentation, and be prepared to delete a lot of misses. This one has a bit of a shake to it. I think it gives it a different sort of maybe staccato, jumpy feel. And it just doesn't have to be trees. Can work well with flowers. I'm sure you recognize this is of tulips. And I like to just plop down on the ground and play with this technique. I just really enjoy the abstract movement effect that you get. This one not recognizable, but very abstract. It's a very colorful bunch of autumn leaves. And I like to experiment with other subjects, so you can go beyond nature. There's an old steel factory near us called Steel Stacks. And I love photographing the structures and the colorful rust. The patterns, the textures are fantastic. But how about a motion blur here? Very abstract, but beautiful. The Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, just a small panning blur gives it a ghost-like effect. The ocean, now the panning is horizontal. So on all these examples, the camera is moving, but the subject is not. Let's go back to Cuba, a different kind of panning. Now, both the subject and the camera are moving. Now we follow our subject with the camera, and this allows us to get the subject relatively sharp and blur the background. So you actually try to match the subject's rate of movement and the direction in which it's traveling. And again, You can do this with a tripod, but I like doing it handheld. And again, I do that technique where I kind of brace my elbows right into my side, keep my camera steady. So you basically, you're swiveling your camera along a parallel axis to the moving subject, and you hope to get at least a part of your subject in focus. So in Cuba, these colorful cars, they were a distance away from me. So I'm panning at about this speed. Swipe, swipe. Now it gets really crazy. At the velodrome in Pennsylvania, these cyclists are very close to my camera, so the panning has to take much faster. Swipe, swipe, swipe. And so here all you see in focus is this guy's knee, and then you see this sort of explosion of motion in front and behind. So, and you get some crazy stuff. It can be quite surreal, but I love the effect created by the spinning of the spokes. So if you want to try this, you have to be on, again, shutter priority. I start with 1/30th of a second or 1/15th of a second. You make adjustments. It does depend on how far away you are from your subject and how fast they're moving. And you just keep practicing as they go by. And I find, keep moving even after they've gone. That just helps you keep your camera steady so you don't wind up, dipping or something like that. And be prepared to take lots of frames, of which most will be throwaways. But I enjoy surprises of, maybe bizarre, ghostly images like this. A few I took just this past fall at a local cyclocross event, which is a lot of fun to watch and photograph. But here I love how the wheels just sort of disappear into the track. Now this guy was coming down a hill, so now I had to pan in a diagonal motion. This was new for me. And I really like this one. I think the clear impression of speed and a colorful and strong composition. Okay, zooming. So now let's add a new twist to intentional camera motion. And by new twist, I mean that literally. Here's a normal picture of colorful autumn tree, but if we twist our zoom lens, you can get some wonderful zoom motion. You zoom in or out while the shutter is open. Okay, hopefully you can see me in the little zoom box there. So you do need a zoom lens to do this effect, but while your shutter is open, you zoom out or you zoom in. Either way works. So here again, autumn trees with no zoom. And now with just a slight zoom. And I think this has quite an impressionistic look. Lights in a store window. After taking a gazillion images of cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C., I wanted a different look. And I like the subtle sort of dreamlike feel to this image. Cityscapes can be fun. Just a subtle zoom on neon lights for a new look. Or try a rotation blur. So in this case, I'm not zooming the camera, I'm just rotating the entire camera while the shutter is open. I do this a lot, by the way. So I don't know if, I didn't even know at the time I took the shot. And I'm not sure if you would call this a zoom or panning or what. I was up on a ladder to try to get above this field of sunflowers, and I must have pushed the shutter button on the way down, but it's kind of fun. And I find that a perfect time to practice these motion techniques is with holiday lights. So here is the traditional Christmas tree shot, but watch what happens after I have a glass of wine. It's having a bit more fun. And oh, I like that. I think I'll have another. And with some more wine, it's really starting to party. Disco party. So, okay. I think maybe this one may have been after a little too much wine. So it's actually a combination of a zoom and rotating the camera at the same time. Again, a combination of panning, twisting, and a zoom blur, or you could call it a hangover. So these are actually holiday lights on an outdoor tree. This was at Longwood Gardens. I had read an article by Olympus about doing these rotational blurs and I wanted to try it out. So I put the camera underneath a lit tree and spun the camera. This is a crop of one of my experiments, I think quite abstract. And I actually like how you can see the effect of the pulsating lights there. So this was pretty hard to set up because I had to get the camera down low on a tripod, pointing straight up and loosen the ball head so that I could try to, swing that camera in a rotational movement. So while I'm out there trying this as usual, I wound up with a surprise. It was freezing cold out. As I'm walking around, I probably hit the shutter with my gloves on and didn't even know it. So, but I think this is kind of fun. Happy mistake. Well, we can't have a conversation about motion photography without talking about water. Because I think water is probably one of the best subjects to experiment with different shutter speeds to get very different results. Fast shutter speed to capture and freeze the motion of water flowing over this sand dollar, or slowed down to freeze the subject, but show the blur of the moving tide as the water sweeps back to the ocean. But be sure to hold on to your tripod. I almost lost a camera on this one. The tide tried to take my tripod with it. And this is somewhere in between. At 1/10 of a second, the splashes hitting the rocks appear kind of stretched out and are emphasized. Now here, this great blue heron, he's flying in one direction above rapids, going in a different direction. So a lot of motion going on here. And to freeze it, I really needed a very, very high shutter speed, 1/2000th of a second. And of course, we have to talk about waterfalls. How do you get that smooth water flow? Some call it maybe a cotton candy look. Do you want to get that look? That's up to you. So here you can see the detail in the water, the crunchiness of it. This is at a relatively fast shutter speed. Now here's the same scene with the shutter opened longer, and now it's got that smoothed out cotton candy look. So again, neither approach is right or wrong, whatever you like best. So I'm going to show you some waterfalls using different shutter speeds. So here is the same flowing water at different shutter speeds. So I started at 1/1000th of a second. Now let's slow it down to 1/15th of a second, even slower at 1/6 of a second, and now down to a full half second. So you can get an idea that, again, by changing your shutter speed, you're in control of the look of your image. But now let's get into how shutter speed affects exposure, because the more time the shutter is open, the more light comes into your camera. So for these examples, I have switched to manual mode, which means now I'm in control of all the camera settings. So here I started at 1/250th of a second and froze the moving water. So you can see sort of the crunchiness in the foreground here. Now at 1/15th of a second, a blur starts to occur, but still fairly sharp in the pool area in the center. Now it's a bit overexposed, but that can be adjusted by lowering the ISO. Now I'm at a full second. So notice now swirls are starting to form in the pool, and the cascading water definitely has a smoother appearance. At 2 seconds, even more motion is captured, but it's a bit overexposed. Well, my ISO is 200. Let's cut that to 100 and see what happens. Okay, it's the same 2 seconds. So the look of the water is the same, but at ISO, the exposure looks pretty good. So what happens if we go to 4 seconds to go for that really smooth cotton candy look? Well, so much light is now coming in that the image is overexposed. I'm already at the lowest ISO that my camera has. Now, I know some of you were probably yelling to yourself, you could change the f-stop, and you can, but for this example, I'm going to leave that constant. Instead, I'm going to add a neutral density filter to the front of the lens. It's kind of like putting sunglasses on your camera, and that will cut down the light. So yes, by adding that filter to cut down some light, the exposure looks much better. I now have that smooth, dreamy look to the water. And here's one more at 6 seconds. And again, this may be too much smoothing out of the water for you, but that's up to you as an artist. So a few more waterfalls. To be sure that your surrounding landscape is all in focus during a long exposure, obviously a tripod is essential. And now I can check this one off my bucket list. very spectacular, but very popular waterfall in Oregon. And one of the largest waterfalls in Iceland with a drop of almost 200 feet. You can actually walk right up to the base of this and you get wet from the spray, but it's worth it. I just love this lone figure just dwarfed by the power of nature. And maybe some of you have been here. This is Thunder Hole in Acadia in Maine. The waves rush into this small cavern and the water is forced out with sort of this thunderous roar, hence the name. This is not a really safe spot for this man to be standing. Some years back, 3 people were up on these rocks and a rogue wave came up and actually took them out to sea. Very powerful force of water. And a very different image of water, flowing and serene. This is of the swells created off the back of a powerboat. The beautiful fountains at Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. And you know, they don't allow tripods during the fountain show. So this is handheld. I was pretty far away and you can see this has a high ISO of 16,000, which again creates some noise or a bit of a grainy look, but in this one, it doesn't bother me. And we don't always have perfect weather conditions. Well, while Jim and I were photographing at a Pennsylvania state park, we took cover in our car just before this huge storm broke out. So we were trapped in the car. So what do? I take shots through the windshield of the rain using varying shutter speeds. That's how I practice. That's how I learn. So, and when the rain let up, I captured this graceful flow of the water. So this was actually taken on a bright sunny day and there was a sprinkler going and the sunlight highlighted the little streaks of water. And I just turned a bit and this was the effect of 2 sprinklers that were crossing paths. So this is a technique I'm still working on, water splash. This was at an outdoor sculpture garden and I didn't have a tripod, so I actually set the camera right on the ground to keep it steady. So to get a water splash like this, you really should use a flash, but I was actually pretty happy to get this one with natural light. Now this one may be a bit difficult to figure out. You get the sense of water flowing, but the image is a bit abstract. Is that some kind of rabbit from Mars swimming through rapids? Well, it's actually simulated motion, as in reality, nothing is moving. It might start to make sense in its original vertical orientation. It's a macro image of an icicle. And still talking about water, Jim and I do all sorts of wacky photo experiments. So we wanted to capture wine splashing up the side of a wine glass. You've probably seen some of this on some wine labels, you know, like with splashing up. It's on, you know, the expensive wine, the kind that comes in the big cardboard box. So Jim built this ramp and put a wooden stop at the bottom. So when the glasses slid down, the idea is they would hit this ramp, causing the liquid to flow up and out of the side. So this took a lot of practice. We're getting closer. Yeah, it's closer. We decided to add some food coloring. Oops, we had a casualty. And yeah, this is more of what we were looking for. We got some random splashes and we finally got a pretty good one. Cropped in tighter for the final image and gave it a high key look. So, and a great way to capture motion using water is with reflections. Maybe again, nothing is moving, but it certainly looks like it is. Another reflection. And I think this gives the feel of one of those panning motion blurs, but it's actually just the distortion from the slight movement of the water. Quite impressionistic. Or quite abstract. The reflection of a windjammer in Maine. Okay, here comes another mistake. We're paddling back from a twilight canoe trip and I was intrigued by the reflections of the houses on the lake. I think Jim intentionally rocked the boat and this is what I got. So I swang, but I love it. I think it looks maybe like curved Asian boats in front of a mountain range, quite peaceful and almost mystical. So I do want to describe a bit more about neutral density filters as they can make quite a difference. So here's the ocean in Acadia hitting the rocks. You can see the crunchy detail. 1/125th of a second. But maybe you want to go for a different look. Smooth that water out a bit. But going to a full 6 seconds on a bright sunny day, it would look something like this. Way too much light is coming into your camera, and you can't adjust any settings to get a good exposure when your shutter is letting in bright sunlight for a full 6 seconds. So you have to put those sunglasses on the front of your lens. You have to add a neutral density filter. Hopefully you can see this. It looks like sunglasses. And they come in different stops. This is a 2-stop. This one is a full 10-stop. So you can see it's much darker. You really can't see me through it. So, and clouds, they take on a mysterious feel when stretched out by using a neutral density filter and a long exposure. So on all these, I'm using the exact same f-stop and ISO. So here I'm with 8 seconds, and you see the same clouds, but they're starting to stretch out over 8 seconds because I've put on 8 stops of neutral density. Now this is a full 30 seconds of really long exposure, 12 stops of neutral density. So I've been stacking those sunglasses on there. And this is actually the exact same image, just converted to black and white, because I really like how these clouds, the effect of these clouds in black and white. Here's a beautiful sunset of the Philadelphia skyline. And I like these clouds, but they take on a whole different look when stretched out over 3 minutes. And again, I really like black and white with this look. So we'll wrap up water and stars with a few star shots. And I have not done a lot of sky photography, but I just wanted to point out the challenges with the motion of the stars, or actually, of course, it's the motion of the Earth. What you need to keep your shutter open long enough for enough light to reach your sensor, but if you leave it open too long, your stars start to turn into little streaks. So this was a 30-second exposure, and I actually, I lit my daughter with a flashlight while the camera was on a tripod. Another Milky Way shot, but I thought this was kind of fun as it picked up a satellite moving through the sky. And I know you've all seen images of star trails, many much better than this, but I finally did my first attempt last winter. This was a really bitter, cold, windy night, and I'm out in a farmer's field in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania to find this dark sky area. So I set up the camera. I used an intervalometer to time the images, so at least I didn't have to freeze my fingers by pushing the shutter every 30 seconds over a period of 40 minutes. So for those of you who don't know how this is done, it's actually multiple images are shot, and then they're actually blended together as layers in Photoshop. So, okay, we are done with water and stars, something different. How would you go about capturing the motion of tiny dandelion seeds flying off flower heads? Scanning. The camera is a flatbed scanner. This is just a scanner we bought to scan documents, a Canon CanoScan. So here, the image on the left shows how the onions and the tomatoes were placed. So see the big onion, bottom left and top right. Here's the scan from that image. So it's actually shooting from the bottom up. The camera is below the glass. So everything's upside down. It's also backwards. Now the big onion is on the right, on the bottom, and the left on the top. So it kind of plays with your brain because everything is upside down and backwards. So this is what an arrangement of flowers looks like as it's placed on the scanner. It looks kind of like a mess, doesn't it? Here is the scan from that mess. So I want to point out down here is a big mayapple flower, smaller mayapple flower, surrounded by a sprig of azalea. Here's the big mayapple flower, the smaller mayapple flower, and here's that sprig of azalea. So hopefully you get an idea of what's happening here. And this is how I use this to simulate motion. This is jewelweed. And as a child, I loved just trying to gently grab these seed pods and letting them pop open in my hand because they make these little springs that shoot the seeds out. So I just took all the pieces and laid them on the scanner to make it look like an exploding plant. Lettuce, tomatoes, and peppers gently falling to create a beautiful salad. So this one is actually a composite of 2 images, as the floating veggies were done on the scanner and the bowl is just a camera shot. And then I did combine the two in Photoshop. But with this technique, you can simulate the magic of milkweed seed pods floating away. I don't know how you could capture a scene like this out in the field. So here, let me take a pause here and ask if there are any questions. So I'm not sure who on your end has been hopefully monitoring the chat, or if people can unmute themselves. I don't know if who's ever in charge has to disable the mute button or how you want to handle that, but I'd love to take a break and see if you have any questions here. And I'm getting crickets. If there are no questions, I can continue, but maybe it's that the mute button is still on. Is whomever is moderating, if you can just let me know if there's anything in the chat or not. You may have to unmute yourself. I hope I'm still talking to an audience. It's one thing that's always so bizarre about these live presentations. I'm always feeling like I'm speaking to an empty room. But okay, I will continue and hopefully.
We have some questions. Hold on.
There they are. Yay. Thank you. Okay, I heard that there were some questions and then it went mute again.
Yeah, we have some questions. Let me just find them in the chat here.
Okay.
Somebody asked, have you used the camera neutral density filter, which I think you went over that. So that question's been asked. Oh, in-camera neutral density filter.
I have not. My camera does not have that as far as I know. I'm sure there are a lot more expensive cameras that maybe do have them, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Somebody asked, do you close the scanner lid when scanning?
No. If I did, those tomatoes would have made a big mess. They would have squashed down. It's really pretty interesting with the flatbed scanner. The light source is right underneath that glass. And the light is so close to the subject. So your subject is right on top of that glass and the light is right under it. So that light comes across, it scans across, and it's very bright, but it falls off very quickly. So, the light travels in a band just below the glass. It's just a fraction of an inch away from the object on the glass, so it falls off. So I do this with the lid open. I do it in the daytime with the window open. I do avoid a bright light like right over the scanner, but other than that, the light falls off to blackness. It's
what
pretty cool.
Scanner do you use?
I use a Canon CanaScan 8600. It's nothing fancy. We bought it just to scan like household documents. I think it costs maybe $120 or something like that.
So basically you can use any scanner then?
As far as I know, yeah.
Yeah.
There are probably some cheap models that might not work, but mine has settings in it. So I do set it to a higher DPI. I usually scan at about 600 DPI. And so you get incredible detail with that.
Okay. Do you use auto ISO?
On the scanner?
On when you're shooting your camera.
Oh, okay. I was going to say the scanner, as far as I know, doesn't have ISO. When I shoot, I usually use auto ISO, yes. And for the examples where I was using shutter priority, that means it definitely is auto ISO and auto aperture. I'm telling the camera how much time I want the exposure to be open, and the camera is choosing the rest. Anything else?
That's the only questions at the moment.
Okay, I shall continue. Okay, let's move on to rear curtain sync. So when shooting with a flash and using a slow shutter speed, you can record movement and freeze it at the same time. So here I held up 4 golf balls and Jim opened the shutter. I dropped them. They bounced down, back up, They suspended for a fraction of a second. That's why they're a little bit more in focus right there. And then as they came back down, flash. And that's the flash is freezing that motion right there. So here, I did a selfie with a 10-second delay on the timer so I could run and get in the shot myself. So there is a setting in most cameras called rear curtain sync. So basically every time you take a camera shot, the first curtain opens, letting the light into your camera. And then at the end of your exposure, the second curtain closes and then it resets and it gets ready for the next shot. Well, with rear curtain sync, it opens, it's exposing, and right before this curtain closes, the flash goes off. So the flash goes off at the end, or the rear curtain at the end of your exposure. So you can see the motion as I'm moving around, and then the flash goes off at the end. So something is in focus. So then I experimented with some light sticks. Oh, someone's not muted again. So I experimented with some light sticks and probably some wine. And you can see Jim in the back there. He's trying to ignore me in the next room. So I'm just having fun and experimenting with this. And, you know, Jim and I played around with a lot of techniques, and we played around with this during the COVID shutdown. So this was a 2-second exposure as I'm moving through the frame and the flash goes off at the end. And I like this one. I think it looks like my hair flew off. And we have this mottled gray background set up, which is why you see here sort of a smoky textured kind of look. And I like this textured look, but this wasn't quite what I wanted to achieve. So I actually asked for a black background for my birthday, because this is the look that I wanted to create with a black background. And of course, I did rely on Jim as the lighting expert. To the right over here is a continuous light in a softbox that he set up. And that diffuses and spreads the light. And that's providing the light as I'm jumping around through the frame. And then on the left, he has a speed light that fires at the end of the exposure to flash and freeze the action. So again, it's the combination of me jumping around during the long exposure and then a flash at the end. And here's another from the same photo shoot. Jim says I look like an angel. Okay. LAPP, or light art performance photography, is not only a mouthful, it's a style in which you literally paint your pictures with light. Now, this is fun. And the crazy part is it is created with only one picture. No Photoshop skills needed. You just grab a light and experiment. So if I was in the room with you, I would ask you to guess how I did this. And I'm sure some of you can guess. So we attached a string of LED lights to a canoe paddle. And this is the motion of the paddle as Jim paddles in the dark. And I take a 30-second shot. Here's another. And some of you have probably done this, fire spinning. So this is done by swinging steel wool that's been set on fire. So our camera club hosted a workshop. We did this in a safe location at a firefighter training location. And with a slow shutter speed of 10 seconds, you capture this rain of the sparks flying down. So of course, we did something similar at home. Now Jim has me holding a grinder on a piece of sheet metal to create these flying sparks. We are safe here. I've got on safety goggles and gloves and a hat and a safety apron. But this is actually another example of rear curtain sync, as it is a long exposure of a half second to show the spray of those sparks flying out, but then a flash at the end to freeze my face and show my face. And the next thing I know, Jim asked me to wear my dark exercise clothes, and then he's wrapping colorful string lights around me. Now what is he trying to do? This. He had me run through the frame when it was dark enough. So again, a combination of light painting, or LAPP, that light art performance photography, and rear curtain sync as the flash was burst at the end to freeze the image of me. Now, we didn't have to do the rear curtain sync with the flash. We could have just done a fun exposure. And I think actually that would be fun on its own, just showing me with these lights wrapped around my body, but I kind of like the context it gives with having me in the shot as well. So this one usually stumps people. Well, we have a friend, Charles. Charles loves playing with all sorts of toys to create light motion. And he did a workshop for our club. So you can see here the bicycle tire with lights placed around the rim. And here you can see it in the dark and get the idea of how it spins around on the floor. And it takes 4 seconds to go around in one rotation. And this is Charles just walking through the frame in the dark. He's just kind of moving that bicycle wheel around. And here's Charles holding a lightsaber, and this has some ambient light so you can get an idea of what's going on. This is what the image looks like in the dark. And here he's swinging his lightsaber around him, and you can see his silhouette in the middle. And here's my husband, Jim, again. Isn't he a good sport? So for this one, our friend Charles is walking around Jim, waving a red flashlight wand to make it look like he's on fire. So my camera was actually on bulb mode, which that means the shutter is opened with a remote cable, and it was left open until Charles was finished painting with light. And when he said stop, the remote button was pushed again to end the exposure. And that's why you see that kind of strange 53 seconds down there, that the bulb manually controlled the amount of time the shutter was open. And something new I learned while doing research for this presentation, physiograms. They create some nice abstract light painting images. The pattern's similar to the spirograph if you had that when you were a kid. So it's quite easy and cheap to create. Give it a try. And here's how you do it. 30 seconds or longer. Again, you have to pre-focus this. So I attached a pen light to a string and I hung it from a ceiling fan. The ceiling fan is off. That's not what gives it the motion. I just gently pushed the pen light on the string and I tried to push it in a pendulum motion to get this effect. But you can create some fun and sort of out of this world graphic images. So let's move on to long exposure multi-flash. So now we paint with bursts of light. This is a single frame of just 2 dancers. A tripod is a must. You set it up in pre-focus, then turn out the lights. In this case, we left the shutter open for 8 seconds. And as these dancers danced across in the dark, a burst of flash from a speed light was manually triggered. Flash, 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 to freeze the dancers in motion. And this one is also 8 seconds. This time the flash was shot 5 times. And this was done at the workshop by our friend Charles. But of course, Jim and I had to try this at home. So this was done with a Canon Speedlight set in multi-mode, which means that it was preset to fire 5 bursts per second over 3 seconds. So flash, 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 very fast. And this is a rather surreal image, but this is what it started out like. And we made many attempts at this, and most were just a confusing jumble. Kind of hard to tell what the heck you're looking at. Maybe it's because I don't really know how to pose in something like this, but I rather like just the jumble of hands down here. So this is Jim's shot, but I cropped in on it and wound up with this, and I kind of like that. So this one worked a bit better. Yeah.
Betsy, when would you like to take a quick 10-minute break? I want to make sure I stop you at a good time.
Oh, okay. All right, so I took the break for questions. Do you want to take like a 10-minute break just so everyone can go refresh their drink or whatever?
Yes, please.
Okay, I didn't understand that. All right, let me just get right to the end of this section and we'll do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this one actually worked out a bit better. We lowered the number of flash bursts down. So it was 15 before, now it's down to 9. And I think this is a bit less jumbled. So I think I'm about to punch myself in the face. Okay, and that wraps up this section. So let's take our break right here before we go to Pixel Stick. So it is now 9:13, so at about 9:23, you want to resume? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, we'll see you
Yeah,
back.
that's
at-
fine.
Okay, I'll see you back. at
If anybody wants to
9:23.
unmute themselves, they can. And we'll remute you when the meeting starts again.
Okay. And I'm just gonna get a quick water break, and then if people do want to unmute, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments during the break. I'll be right back.
I have a question. How did you use the flash in a burst mode?
Okay, I'm back with my water. Okay. Someone asked the question, how do you use the flash in burst mode? That was, so Jim actually has a speed light. It's a Canon speed light, and he can preset it to what's called a multi-flash mode. So, oh, I got water already. Thank you, though. So I'm answering your question. The question is about, here comes my technical expert with water. So the question was, how do you use your flash in this multi-flash mode? So I was explaining that you have a Canon speed light that has a setting called multi-flash on it, and you can preset it. Yeah, a lot of flashes have this. So if you have an external flash, it probably has a multi-mode on it. And typically you can adjust that. So you can say how many flashes you want to go over how many seconds. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
May I ask, is a camera involved at all when you do that scanner photography?
No, unless you like, technically the scanner is a camera. So, but there is no traditional camera like this. The camera is the scanner. So it's actually the same technology as if you look up the definition of a camera, it's, exposing with light, and that's exactly the same thing that the scanner does. So I guess technically it's a camera, but not the traditional one that you would think of.
And where is the picture ends up on a piece of Xerox paper? Or
No. I have the scanner connected to the computer. So, and a lot of people, if they have a flatbed scanner, they typically would attach it to their computer, because whatever they're scanning, let's say they're scanning a document, they want it on their computer so they can email it to someone or download it and print it or whatever. So, there's just a cable that just attaches from your scanner to your computer. And so then I set up a folder on my computer, and all of the images that I scan go right into my computer. I can pull them into Lightroom and treat them just like any other photograph.
very, very interesting.
Now, I will be sharing a PDF at the end of the presentation, and my website is on that. And I'll flash it up on the screen as well if you want to write down the website. But our website has more information on motion photography, and I do have an area on there on scanography. It's sometimes called scanner photography or scanography. So that goes into a little bit more detail on it, so that might be helpful. But it's really easier than one would think. And boy, you get some
The results were
fun
fantastic.
stuff. Yeah, you get some fun stuff.
$120 for the scanner, something like that.
Yeah,
Right. Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome.
Betsy,
Yeah,
I don't have any questions. This was very comprehensive. I just wanted to thank you for giving all the settings so to make it a real educational experience for us to follow up on. We get too many presenters here who just come out, want to open up a folder and show us pretty pictures. This was real educational value, and I want to thank you.
oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I've been through this journey myself. Now it's been about 10 years, but when Jim first got me into this and I joined the camera club, I knew nothing. So, and our camera club that I'm involved with, we've got people who are brand new and they barely know how to turn their camera on, much less settings. And then we've got people who are just amazing, knowledgeable photographers. So, I try to put together a presentation that's got a little bit for beginners and give that explanation. And I recognize that may be boring for some of you who, know all about how to shoot a waterfall and stuff like that. But so hopefully there's something for everybody. So thank you.
Fantastic, excellent.
Thanks. I will mention too that I did check out your website, and I think it was 2 years ago, maybe. One of your challenges was actually motion photography. And I just jotted down a couple, and I don't know if these people are still members or not. I did not see their name pop up, but Joseph Gilchrist, he had a waterfall image of Dark Hollow Falls that I believe is in Shenandoah. Sounds familiar. Anyway, it was, he clearly understands how to capture a waterfall and capture some slow motion there. It was really, really nice. And then he had another image it was called The Dancer, water drop, a water droplet. I showed you that one that I did of the water splash, and I was pleased that I captured it. Well, he had one, and I'm sure he used a flash because it was just a stunning capture of a water droplet. And as it flew up, it looked like a dancer.
Already unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah, actually, that one was taken. That one had the water droplet had actually three flashes on it.
The colors, right?
Yes, there were two. There were actually two with blue filters on it, and one with a red filter.
Okay.
And so I had it around, and then I was capturing it with a water drop. I had a droplet. I was creating droplets with one of these, solenoid type things, and that's how I was capturing it.
Is that machine that kind of times it for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was using one of the. I think mine was a Pluto trigger is what I was using, but it has actually a thing like that. So yeah.
Okay.
And that was. Yeah.
I love that image, and the colors in it. I thought you must have had multiple lights or something like that. So thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
I do have a question. Did you manipulate that dance at all in post?
No.
Oh, it really happened that way.
I have a whole series of them, and it's just a matter of, I have a couple that look like dancers. When I saw that, it was just, that's what it reminded me of. I've got some that look like umbrellas. I've got other ones. I've got another drop. I got an extra drop that's dropping down. So things like that are occurring. So yeah.
Wow. Well,
and by the way, that was in Shenandoah, and that was me sitting in the middle of the stream on a rock.
well, kudos to you for getting into the action.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were both great shots. So I'm glad I jotted those down.
Okay.
There was also a nice one that I saw by Francisco Gomez of a running horse, where I had those panning blurs of the cars in Cuba. It was the same technique, and he did it of a running horse, and it was a really special capture as well.
Do you want to come talk about your picture? So while we're interrupting Francisco, I have a quick question. When
Sure.
you said the flash is on the back end, is that in camera or is that in the flash itself? That setting?
The rear curtain sync.
Yes.
Yeah, either one. Either one. My Sony has a little pop-up flash on it. So those ones the selfie that I did of myself, I just used the flash right on the camera. The ones that were more sophisticated, the ones where I was jumping around pretending to be a ballet dancer, that was an off-camera flash. So you can do it either way.
Okay. Here's Francisco. He can tell you about his cars.
Oh, good. Hi, Francisco.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
I
good.
don't remember which picture is this.
It was a running horse. Looks like I didn't write down the name of the image. I should have.
Okay,
but-
yes, I remember the idea. I remember which one is that. Yeah, the way I did that, it was, yes, I was following the horse, actually. We were at a stable right here in Princeton, actually.
Okay.
And the way we did it was just following the horse. I mean, we did it like 10,000 times, but
Yes.
but yeah, that's the only way you get it.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that is key to these. You just got to do them over and over and
I
over.
know,
Eventually
very
you get kind
difficult.
of better at it, but you still get a lot of misses, right?
Right, and I'm out of all those shots, that was the only shot that was worth, really, that I thought it was like, there was, most of the horse was in focus.
that you can with the
Yeah,
horse.
Yeah.
I thought that one was very good. So thank
They
you.
got
I'm
him
glad you
running
came
up
on
and
and
down all
shared.
the time.
Okay.
Oh,
You
yeah.
gotta explain it.
Yeah, we
Alright.
were panning, we were panning following the horse.
Yep, panning.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's now, I think the 10 minutes are up. Shall I continue? Sound okay? All right, so let's move on to Pixel Stick. So this is a toy that Jim was actually awarded this at one of our camera club celebrations. Sometimes we get prizes for things. There are actually 200 tiny LED lights along the edge of this stick. And the Pixel Stick comes with a dozen built-in patterns, different colors, rainbow patterns. Hold on, my dog just opened the door. I'm going to close it. Okay. Oh, hold on a second. Okay. And if you wave this Pixel Stick about while walking, it creates these really, really cool patterns. So this is that pre-programmed rainbow pattern that actually comes with the stick. And you can create some fun stuff like this. So here, Jim asked me to hold the Pixel Stick down close to the ground and walk through our woods. So it created sort of this ribbon of a path. So let's add a person to the shot. We asked our friend to pose, stand as still as you can, while we walked behind her with the Pixel Stick so that she appears as a silhouette. So here's another example of that rear curtain flash. And we've used that technique with the Pixel Stick. So you can actually see me. This is me over here on the left as I'm finishing up walking that stick and kind of waving it around behind Jim. And then at the end of the exposure, flash so that we could see him and he's frozen. And here's another example. This time I'm the subject. And here's where it gets really crazy. You can actually load your own image onto the Pixel Stick. So each one of its 200 LEDs, it acts like a pixel on a screen, displaying your image one vertical line at a time as you walk. So here we have our friend Bob set up like he's raising a glass to himself. So, when Jim walks by, all you see is this blinking light. It actually kind of looks a little bit like this. So we already had this picture of Bob and we downloaded this onto the Pixel Stick. And then we just asked Bob to sit in the dark and hold up his beer bottle and sit still. He had no idea what we were doing. So again, another image of Bob is on the stick and Jim's walking by with it and slices of the photo flash. So when Jim was done walking with the stick, again, we burst a flash onto Bob so you can see him there. Alas, here's the end result, the real Bob and virtual Bob together. This is a single frame. It is not photoshopped. For this one, I'm actually sitting in a canoe that's up on a picnic table. So Jim builds and restores wooden canoes, and this is one that he built. So an image of the ocean was loaded onto the Pixel Stick, and then Jim walked by twice, once with the ocean image on the stick behind me, and then again in front of me. And here, Jim loaded a creepy picture of himself and he walked it behind me. He just told me to look scared. I had no idea what image was on the stick, but he's right, it's pretty creepy. Okay, what if you are the motion? So you've seen examples like this where the photographer and the camera are stationary and the subject has movement. So here you see the ghost-like images of people as they move up the escalator. Well, what happens if the photographer is moving on the escalator? both the photographer and camera are moving through something that is stationary. So the escalator steps appear sharp as the camera and the steps are both moving together. But the sides of the escalator show the motion as the camera moves up and the sides do not. So I had to try this one about 20 times as I was paddling solo. So I had to paddle really hard to get the canoe moving and then lay back low, put the paddle down, pick up my camera, and I had to lay down low because I needed the bow in the shot for context. And I had a lot of misses, but, and this is that really pretty canoe that Jim built. But you get the idea. The canoe is sharp as the camera is moving with the canoe while the grasses in the water appear to glide by. Okay, now we're going to take it up another level. What if you are in a car going 25 miles per hour while you pan a subject? As the car goes by, you rotate the camera to keep the subject in the frame. You do need two people to do this, a driver and a photographer. So when you get this swirly, crazy rotation effect, I actually call them swirlies, and I'm going to try to demonstrate this. So hopefully, again, you can see me in that little Zoom box there. But pretend that the back of this chair is a tree, and behind the tree is a road. So I'm in a car, and as the car comes down the road approaching the tree, I'm pointing my camera at the tree. And as the car goes by, I keep my camera pointed at the tree. So I started like that. I'm swiveling the camera. So it's actually a combination of the lateral movement of the car and the rotational movement of the camera. And you just get this crazy stuff. So this works great with colorful trees such as dogwoods or redbuds. So all those dogwoods out there right now, this is a great time to try this. Autumn trees, the colorful autumn trees, that's probably my favorite time to do it. But you can also focus on other subjects, such as this cabin in Valley Forge. And so down here, you can see the rotation effect right down there on the grass. I think this kind of looks like ghosts are leaving the cemetery. And sometimes it just results in sort of a hurricane of texture and color. And I just love this technique. It makes me feel the excitement of connecting or immersing with the forest as I move through it. And it can be quite abstract. You get impressions of color and texture, and the details are just dissolved by the motion. But in most images, there's enough form retained to suggest a sense of subject. So, and here are the how-to notes. So this is shot from a moving car. Please don't try to do this on your own. You drive past your subject while rotating your camera to keep it pointed at your subject. About 25 miles per hour, I think, works best, but I have done this 50 miles per hour on the highway. It's just harder. About 1/15 of a second, but you can adjust that. And it does take a lot of practice. And we were just talking during the break about the swipes, how you get a lot of images before you get one you like. You have to take even more of this to, I'll take, 100 shots before I get one that's halfway decent. So up until now, with the exception of the Star Trails image and the falling salad, everything can be done in camera. No Photoshop necessary. So let's look at ways to create or simulate motion using some post-processing tools. So this looks like a zoom blur, but it was actually a fully focused sunflower. This radial blur was added in Photoshop, and I'm not going to get into the how-to specifics of Photoshop, as that would be a whole other presentation. I just want to share a few ideas of how you can use post-processing to simulate motion. I wanted to capture fireflies and create a magical fairyland look. So I took about 20 shots. Each one was 6 seconds to capture the movement of those lightning bugs. And then it's actually pretty easy to blend them together as layers in Photoshop. Now in this one, I started out with a normal shot of birch trees. And in this case, I added the blur in Photoshop. So this is different than the panning blurs we did before, because I wanted to add back in some of the bark texture. Okay, so here in the final image, you see a little bit of that bark texture. Let me go back before and after. And this is done by bringing both images into Photoshop as layers and just brushing a bit of the texture from one layer onto another. So back to setting up the scene and waiting for something to happen. This time I'll give it a little Photoshop help. Chelsea Market in New York City. There's this stretch of flooring that's lit from below. And boy, I just loved watching the variety of legs and shoes. And I felt there had to be a shot. So I just sat on a bench and just took lots and lots of shots. And back at the computer, I kind of like this one with that wheelchair in it. And this one with the colorful shoes. So I thought, well, maybe I can combine the two. So, and this is my finished image. And this represents the hustle and bustle and the diversity that I was experiencing at the time. And, you know, I didn't even realize until about a month later that these colorful shoes moving into the frame, they're the same pair of feet walking out of the frame, but that's okay. So remember this one done in camera using the long exposure and rear curtain sync. This motion blur was all done in post-processing. I just used a blur filter in Photoshop. I love the solitude of this lonely figure walking on a shallow beach in Cape Cod, these gentle rolling waves. But here's the original image. Not a great photo, but I liked the mood, so I decided to try to give it a little help in Photoshop. So I used a motion blur to filter to sort of smooth out those waves, and then I just enhanced the color to create this serene scene. This is how I remember the magic of those endless patterns of those shallow waves. And a fun trick you can use on seascapes. This one I used a fast shutter speed to capture the crashing surf. This one I used that neutral density filter to show the soft, more romantic look of the ocean. But then I wanted to add the excitement of the waves, so I can combine the two images and just brush in the waves and the spray from the other image. Couple images captured of skateboarders. This is FDR Park in Philadelphia. I liked the shadow in this one. And this one caught in midair. A second later, this guy was on the ground. So these were done, of course, with a fast shutter speed. But I wondered if I could simulate motion by using multiple images similar to what Thomas Eakins did. So I stood in one place and put my camera on burst mode. And I'm just clicking away. 13 images blended together in Photoshop. And I did the same with the snow geese at Middle Creek. This is about 30 separate exposures of images taken in burst mode and then combined in Photoshop. So as opposed to just freezing birds in flight, I think it gives you the impression of movement. You can see the flight pattern as they move across the sky. And this one has a more painterly look to it. And you can actually see that sort of the movement of the winter vegetation as it sways in the breeze. And this effect was created by blending multiple exposures together, multiple images. So, and I want to share my thought process on a shot. Jim is in charge of workshops for our club, and he loves ballet. So he set up a photo workshop with the local ballet company, the Brandywine Ballet. And they provided the dancers in their studio. We had camera club members bring studio lights, and it was a lot of fun. And the dancers were amazing. And I think everyone came away with shots they were happy with, and I got quite a few. But in addition to shots like this, I wanted to try something unique. There were 25 camera club members in the same place, shooting the same dancers with the same poses. I wanted a shot that no one else in the group that day would have. I wanted this. So remember that story of Ansel Adams and visualization, the combination of imagination and technique. I wanted to show a progression of movement. So I visualized this in advance and had to plan what I needed to do. So how did I do this? Well, most of the images were shot with a very fast shutter speed. That's why we brought all the high-powered lights. But as you can see here, this image was shot to freeze the amazing Amanda at the height of a leap. Note the high ISO and 1/1000th of a second. Now, look what happens when we go with a much longer shutter speed. There's a blur that indicates movement. Now, I didn't want a two-faced Amanda, but I wanted to show you that you have to get a lot to get a few that you like. You get a lot of throwaways again. So you can see here, this is the shots that I use straight out of the camera. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this last one, I wanted her to face the opposite direction. So I turned her around and put them all together in Photoshop, finished image. And a different technique to show motion. I took multiple images in succession and then brought them together in layers in Photoshop. And by lowering the opacity of some of the images, there's just a subtle sense of graceful movement. And this was done the same way. And sometimes I just like to experiment. I wondered what would happen if I put Amanda, the ballet dancer, inside one of my swirly hurricanes. Kind of fun. So we drove by these giant wind turbines, and I thought I would try the same technique here. So this is 20 images combined in Photoshop. So the last series I will share, they show examples of images that began in my imagination, and I had to figure out how to create it. So this was a bit difficult, as the model was not as cooperative as it appears in this image. My dog Shadow did not want to sit still. This presented a different kind of motion challenge, how to make it stop. So this took a couple of assistants. There's Jim, our daughter Alex, a lot of flour, a lot of tries. And Jim figured out if he put a bit of peanut butter right there on that spoon, that did the trick. So this is the shot I used of our dog Shadow. Had Jim toss some flour in and removed Jim's hand, added the flying flour for the motion, and there's Shadow the chef. Now this is not the final shot nor the final model. So now I wanted to set up a dramatic shot and recreate Lizzie Borden. You've heard of her? Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. Well, we started by setting up the lighting and the camera angle. Jim set up side lighting to create that sort of scary look. And I actually have the camera laying on the floor, and you can see I am triggering the remote control in my hand. Now I bring in the real model, our daughter Alex, and try to get her to look menacing. She kept cracking up. So in this, we took quite a few shots. Here I'm holding a fan to try to get her hair to fly up. First I tried a hair dryer. It wasn't powerful enough, so I brought in an electric fan, and that really put some motion in her hair. And we're making adjustments to the lighting. We had some problems as the axe was casting a shadow across the side of her face. So she's trying different positions. Jim's moving the light around, and we're getting closer. And here's my final image. Lizzie Borden makes me shudder. And another version from the same shoot. Now this one I put in sepia to give it an old time look. Still quite terrifying. So this is our other daughter, Kelsey. She looks a bit nicer, don't you think? Well, while stuck at home during the lockdown, Jim and I watched a lot of photography videos and practiced lighting. And Jim set up this softbox to light above Kelsey. It really provides this quite beautiful light. And for Kelsey, I didn't use a fan. I brought in the leaf blower. And then Jim put a couple of colored gels on the light. We're just experimenting. And then I asked her to pose with a lantern, like she was afraid and running away. She plays a virtual game with friends called Pathfinders that includes dragons. So I envisioned a composite of her running through the forest, chased by a dragon. So then I photographed her Pathfinder dragon, went into my archives, found an image of the redwood forest in Oregon, added a blue tone in Photoshop, and blended them together. Now I just need to add the dragon. And I hate it. I think it just looks stupid. So, you know, not everything goes according to plan. So I scrapped the dragon, but I still like the image. And I thought, well, maybe I can adjust the crop, add a light in that lantern, and change the glow on her face to match the lantern light. And here's my finished image, into the woods. And you can use your imagination as to what she's running from. Okay, 2 more examples and we'll wrap this up then. Our camera club has a fun summer challenge. And a few years ago, the theme was song titles. And we were assigned 10 different song titles to illustrate with our photography. So you may know the song, I Set Fire to the Rain by Adele. Well, I immediately visualized this was the image I wanted to create. I wanted it to rain water and rain fire on me. So I started with a shot of me in one of our canoes. Jim also built this one. Cropped in, I'll use this in the shot. And then I used the fire from that fire spinning workshop. And I'll use some of these sparks in the final image. Then I needed some rain. I asked Jim to hold up the hose at the garden. And then I practiced with different shutter speeds, fast, a bit slower, then added clarity. Now I had my rain. So next I composited the rain and the sparks and the image of me. And you can see how I brought the layers in on a tilt to hit the umbrella the way I wanted. And all I need to do is just add some sparks on top of the umbrella. For my finished image, I set fire to the rain. Now these summer challenges are a lot of fun. They force us to think outside of the box and get creative. And I have done some wacky and embarrassing stuff. Okay, here's the last one. You may know the song, It's All About That Bass, my Mega Trainer. Well, if you do, you know it's actually all about one's derriere. So an image popped into my mind. There was a rather famous image making its rounds on the internet of Kim Kardashian with her rather shapely butt. So yeah, I have no shame. I'm gonna try to replicate this shot of Kim Kardashian. So I did this when Jim went out, as I was actually too embarrassed to even let him know what I was doing. So you can see I'm holding the remote and I'm trying different poses. I bring in the props and this is the one I went with. Remember those wine glasses with the splashing wine? Here they are again. And here's my finished image. Yeah, it's pretty clear. I ain't no size 2, but I can shake it like I'm supposed to do because, you know, I'm all about that bass. So we've all gone a bit stir crazy while stuck at home, but there are so many photo techniques you can learn and try out at home. You don't need to travel. Just experiment, try something new and have fun. And boy, I've had a lot of fun giving this presentation to you. I've really enjoyed this and I hope you've picked up a few new things. And to all of you, I say thank you. So I'll wrap this up with this slide right here. I will be sending a PDF to Valerie and you can share this however you want. And it has many of the slides, not all of them, but it does have all of the slides that have any of those notes on it. And it also has, as you see down here on this slide here, there's my email address and our website. Our website, by the way, has a section on motion photography. And within it, I talk about some of these techniques that we just went over. And Jim and I share a lot more examples of each one of these techniques. So you may find that helpful. And I'm going to open this up for questions now. Again, any other questions or comments, but my email address, feel free if someone tries the flatbed scanner and you're having problems with it, you know, if a week from now you come up with a question, feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to answer you. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions or comments. Maybe everyone can be unmuted.
Yeah, anybody that wants to unmute themselves can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betsy. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I can't wait to
I knew
try
I was
some.
going to love this presentation, and I did.
Yeah,
Oh,
this
thank
was
you.
absolutely fantastic. Thank you
Aw.
so much.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you. You know, I enjoy doing these presentations, but I really do enjoy getting the feedback, especially with Zoom, because I'm not seeing your reaction, you know, I don't know. So I appreciate that.
Well, we were quiet, not because we were muted, but we were completely engrossed.
Yeah, for
Thank you.
sure.
Very
Oh, that's good.
a combination thereof.
Betsy, thank you very, very much on behalf of everyone. We have 10 people in the room here with us in our regular meeting, actually, our in-person part of our meeting, and then the 27 that we have on Zoom. And I can tell you that everybody here in the room greatly enjoyed your presentation. I certainly did.
Oh,
And,
good. How did that
love
work?
seeing
Am I shown on a screen in your
Yeah,
room?
you're on a huge screen and we hear you perfectly.
Oh, good.
It's worked out very, very well. You're on the biggest screen I've ever seen in them.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's great. It's working out very well.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate your coming tonight.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions? Hopefully some of you got some ideas. You want to try some new things?
Oh, yeah.
You've given me a lot of ideas.
Oh, good, good.
Did you say that you ran workshops also?
Jim and I have run a couple workshops for our own camera club. And we actually did one on at-home creativity that had a lot of macro and dropping the fruit into the fish tank and some fun things like that. It's too difficult for us to take a workshop like that on the road. It's just too much stuff to pack up and move around. So we do some workshops, but it's pretty limited.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay, anything else? If not, I will wrap that up. And like I said, if you want to reach out. Okay. John, were you saying something? No. Okay.
My scanner smells like onions.
You do need Windex and you need paper towels. And like with the onions and the tomatoes, I blot them first because you don't want a whole lot of like juice seeping into your scanner. I don't think that would end well.
What size is your scanner? What dimensions?
The dimensions of my scanner, I don't know, it's a little bit bigger than 8.5 by 11. So it's a little bit deeper than 8.5 by 11. I think it's designed for, legal size documents you can put on it.
Thank you.
But again, nothing real fancy.
What was the model of your scanner?
It's a Canon CanoScan 8600. That's what I have, but I'm sure other scanners probably would work well too.
Yeah,
And many of you probably have one of these in your closet somewhere, hook it up, give it a try.
yeah, I have an Epson Perfection 500. I'm sure it would work on there.
Probably.
I've been thinking about it ever since I saw your website.
Good. Thank you for checking the website too. I'm glad you and I think Deborah both said you checked it out ahead of time.
I was very impressed.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the special things I enjoyed about your workshop is how much you and your husband seem to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, we really do. And for those of you who haven't looked at the website, I think right now when you first go to the website, the page that opens up are the results from our most recent summer challenge, where it was kind of a crazy summer challenge and Jim and I struggled with it, but then he decided I would be in every one of his shots and he had to be in every one of mine, and we could kind of tell each other how they wanted to pose, and we had a lot of fun with it. And if you check that out, I think you may enjoy it. You see, we do enjoy doing some crazy things, and that's how we learn.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I have a quick question. Did you ever
sure.
think about putting a glass on top of your scanner so that, it's glass on top of glass, that way you don't have to worry about the juice getting on your scanner itself?
No, I haven't, and maybe I'll try that. I think that's an excellent idea. I don't know what'll happen because now you're adding an extra thickness, and I don't know if the detail will come up as well, but I'm going to give it a try because you're right, that would really help protect it. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, a lot of great ideas shared here. I thank you all so much. Thank you for inviting me and have a good evening. And I will get that PDF of the presentation out by tomorrow. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night,
Betsy.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.